I think that one of the things that's kind of on everybody's mind always, it's probably the biggest burden or perceived burden, is student loans. So tell me about the situation of current student loans within optometry and what you see is the reason for that and what's the future of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, like you mentioned, it's a huge issue in optometry and across the board. I mean, we go to dental, medical, everywhere. Student loans are kind of the hot topic. And I think number one, the reason is these days, student loans are a lot higher than they used to be. I remember when I graduated with about 160,000 in debt. That was considered low. A lot of my peers were 200 or $300,000 in debt. And now with these new grads coming out these days, it's not unusual to see four or even $500,000 in debt. And it's even more for our peers in other industries. So that is number one, is the big thing, is how do you pay that off, especially when you graduate 300 to 400K in debt, and then your starting salary is 100 to 150. That debt to income ratio is just so drastic. And how do you even approach that? And of course, these last 2 years with COVID, we had a lot of loan deferment. So a lot of people didn't have to pay loans for a while, and 0% interest, all these things. And then all of a sudden,
You don't
comes
think,
up that, hey,
yeah,
maybe the
you
government
don't.
might start
So
forgiving loans, which
I
was
want to
always
dig in there
kind of
because I want to get your thoughts about it. I mean, on the one hand, it's like, so I paid my loans off. I had about $110,000
yeah,
in 2008, and I paid them off as quickly as I could. It took me about 2.5 years. So we Dave Ramsey'd it, which we'll get to in a second, because I think your model is very similar. But at some point with professionals,
yeah,
Dave Ramsey's model, in my mind, just sort of peters out. And I want to kind of pick your brain about that, where there's still a good structure, but it seems like, anyway, from my moving, it just doesn't make a lot of sense once you get past a certain point. But in any case, my sense is that any administration at this point is not at least the current administration is not going to restart those loans. What do you think about that? I want to talk about the MyDay multifocal for a second. It's just coming out, and we had the opportunity to do a preclinical trial with this lens this last summer. And there were a couple things that I thought were really helpful. The first one is that it is different than a lot of the multifocals that we've used before in our practices, where patients, especially early emerging presbyopes, really it didn't cause a lot of additional distance blur for them. And the other thing that was really helpful was, because we've never been involved in a clinical trial before, was to understand the sort of questions that we might ask our patients. And we ask our patients a lot of questions about their satisfaction with a contact lens, but what we weren't doing was actually having them score that themselves. So one of the parts of this that was really interesting to me was asking patients on a scale of 1 to 10 how they would score their vision, how they would score their comfort in their current lenses, and then how they would do the same on their new lenses. And it showed me a lot of times where patients would say they were happy, might rate their vision as a 6 or a 7. And then it also reframed their thinking about their current satisfaction in their lenses and allowed me to open up the door to offering other solutions. So if you haven't tried something like that in your clinical practice, I would encourage you to. And I would also encourage you to try the MyDay multifocal for your patients. I'm really excited today to talk about our new sponsor, MacuHealth. We've been using MacuHealth in my practice for the last few years, and there's been a couple things that I really like about it. The first is that when patients go to the store and they're looking for an AREDS 2 supplement, they are bombarded with a lot of different options. What I like about MacuHealth is that it keeps the zinc content at what the AREDS 2 supplement did, so 25 milligrams, and it also adds the benefit of mesozeaxanthine. Additionally, I like MacuHealth because they're always trying to reformulate things so that you can improve absorption with patients. You can also count on them to continue to push the envelope, not just with AREDS type supplements and macular health type supplements, but also visual performance supplements. But now they have an omega-3, and I'm excited to see what they do in the future. So it's been great for my practice, great for my patients. Check out MacuHealth if you haven't done so yet.
Yeah, I have the same opinion as you. And, student loan forgiveness has been talked about a lot, and we've always advised to not gamble on it, to not bet on it, because who knows what's going to happen. And just the logistics of it don't really make sense. Without getting too political, they just they just don't with taxpayer money. How are we going to forgive
Well,
all
and
these
not to
loans
mention that
when
it's
the
not to
money has to
mention
come
that
from
it's
somewhere? So how is that going to be done in
yeah, I
an
mean,
equitable way? So yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath on that. I mean, it's been nice for
yeah,
individuals that have had
so
the
the
0%,
thing about
though,
it for
so
me is
I
like, I
got to give them
think
that.
politically, and I saw this, you probably saw this on social media platforms where, the time was coming up and then here comes the payments due again. And then all the people are kind of tagging POTUS and saying, come on, POTUS, you can't stop this now. And you campaigned on student loan forgiveness. And again, not with getting political, but it's like, I think the easiest thing is for them to pause payments, 0% interest in perpetuity, and kick the can down the road. That's what I see them doing. And I think complete forgiveness seems like, again, trying
Oh
not to
yeah,
be political, but talk about upper middle class welfare. The highest amounts of student loans are for probably the highest earners, potential earners, and they're taking from people who maybe either decided to save for their school
right.
or decided to work, instead of going to school. And so, yeah, I mean, that's going to be a hard pill to swallow. So then what's your advice now in the current situation? What's your
Definitely,
advice now
definitely. Yeah, I
to
agree
students?
there.
Is there kind of a general or new graduates? What's your general advice to them about what to do in the current situation?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, with the current situation, I think it's still wise to stay true to just kind of the solid principles behind debt elimination and starting to invest. So, number one, have a game plan. So, have a blueprint on how you're going to approach this to build wealth and get out of debt. For me, the number one thing you want to put on that list is, first of all, establish an emergency fund. Always have to have that because you never know what's going to happen in the future. So, 3 to 6 months of living expense, just put that away in a savings account. Don't worry about it, just in case something happens where you can't work or you can't generate income. You have that to fall back on. And then number two, start getting rid of that debt. And of course, you want to balance that. You don't want to just put everything into debt because it's 6 to 7%, and that's a guaranteed return. Who knows what the market can give you? So it's always good to invest as well because we got to think about retirement in the future as well. And so just having a solid kind of yin and yang right there, but focusing on that debt and not being distracted from that debt because I feel it's so important to eliminate that as soon as possible because it frees you to do so many things once that debt is gone. Whether it be entrepreneurial pursuits with your own practice or other things, buying real estate. There's a lot of different avenues that open up once you get that debt load off your
Yeah,
shoulders. So that's kind of my general
I would totally agree. I
take
mean, I
on it,
think,
even with everything going
again,
on.
I'm trying to not just use my personal story, but certainly there's something mentally. I think Dave Ramsey does this a lot, right? Sorry to bring him in, but that's the system that I used, and
No,
there's
that's all good.
something mentally that occurs when you kind of go on a path and just get something done and then eliminate that something. It's not just the monthly payment that is eliminated. It's also sort of empowering to know, like, oh, I can do a lot of things with my efforts, right? Because you work harder at certain things and you work more. And so, as opposed to just being content with,
Yeah.
I'm just going to chip away and chip away and chip away. And I think there's just sort of a mentality that comes along with it.
Definitely, definitely. I agree with that. And when I was paying off my loans, I mean, I think we kind of approached it similarly. I just tried to knock them off as soon as I could. And I remember every time I think there was like 4 or 5 different types of loans I had. And every time I knocked out one of them, it was a huge mental like hurdle that I jumped over, and that allowed me to. It was something I could rejoice in. And just looking on our Odies on Finance forum, we see just whenever someone pays off their loans, they always post about it. They're elated, they're happy, and it just really helps everyone else because there's a see comments that come in where everyone else is like, "Hey, this is great. I'm encouraged to pay off my loans in the future," or it just, I was discouraged, but now I'm encouraged because I see another peer that's been able to do it. So we're all in this
Do
together,
you
and
think
it's
that,
just good to see that
so I
collaboration.
guess that kind of builds into the why behind Odies on Finance. Um, I think it can be a little bit misleading because when I hear finance, I'm thinking, well, more loans, more figuring out ways to kind of take more credit and those sorts of things. But it's actually not, as I've kind of delved into your site and just worked with you guys, that's not really the main thing. So kind of talk about ODs on Finance and what your main purpose was, what's your why, and then how that's evolved over the last few years.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just a little bit of back history. We started ODs on Finance in 2018. Originally, Dat and I, and Dat's the other co-founder of ODs on Finance, we just started as a small Facebook group, essentially just an area where ODs could talk about finance, could talk about investing, getting out of debt. And then the mission behind it was to provide all the resources that was necessary for ODs to achieve both personal and professional financial freedom. So whether that be in your personal life or in your business. And so that's what we started to go out and do. We built the website, just started putting up a bunch of resources, but a bunch of articles on how to achieve financial freedom. We started recruiting a bunch of partners that helped out that, whether it be CFPs, CPAs, insurance agents, all the like. And then, yeah, we just kept building the platform. And really the number one thing, though, is that community aspect. I think that's what helps all the ODs that are on our platform right now. We got about 13,000. It's just that they're able to converse about their finances. It's kind of this open forum. We try to keep it as positive as we can. There's guidelines where we can only really say positive things and constructive things. And that way, once again, it's just that collaborative environment where people start learning from each other. They learn from the website, and then they learn from the professionals that we bring on.
Do you think,
and it just
so
continue to grow since then.
why, I mean, there's a clear answer behind why it has been successful, because there's so much debt, of course. But why do you think, why do you think that there's this resistance to, in general, this resistance to thinking about debt earlier on? I mean, why aren't we thinking about this until we get done with school? Or maybe it is, but I don't know that I really thought deeply about it.
Yeah. I think, first of all, in school, finance isn't really taught, to be honest, especially in optometry school. I think for us at SCO, which was a school that really pushed practice ownership. I think I had one practice ownership class, one practice management class, but finance was really something I didn't know much about. I mean, when I got out of school, I had no idea any of these resources existed. It was the same for DAT. And then we started learning about them and understanding how important they were. And that's kind of what led us to start ODs on Finance. But I think really the key is just to have that awareness that, when you get out of school, most individuals are two to $300,000 in debt. I mean, your net worth is negative 200K. I mean, you're technically worth less than someone begging on the street for change, if you really think about it, if you really put it into perspective. And I think if you do put that into perspective when you get out of school, that makes you think a little bit differently about your current situation. Whereas, the common thing is when you get out of school, you buy the doctor car or you go on vacations because now you are a doctor. But really, you got to look at it from a long-term point of view versus just that short term, and realize that, hey, once again, just kind of beating a dead horse here, but getting rid of that debt is going to really propel you. And it's going to propel the profession as well,
Totally.
because
I mean,
you're going to have the freedom to do more things.
When I see people who are struggling, not always, but you get stuck, right? So like if you get the doctor car, if you get the doctor house right away, then you're saddled with that specific level of income. So as an example, the example I always use, I won't use specific dollars, but when I came out of school, I had the opportunity to practice multiple places. Some of them other private entities that I have no ability to own the practice over time. Some of them commercial entities that clearly I wouldn't have the ability to own over time. And they both of them were paying substantially more than what I could make at the office that I chose to go to. And that's a real hard pill to swallow. And I think it's probably harder now because I'm sitting here thinking I'm going to work 5 days a week in this main practice. They're taking a hit because they're bringing me on, right? They're not, they're breaking even at best and probably losing some money for some time. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to also add another day, a sixth day, and maybe even occasionally pick up another day so I can hustle on the side. And where some people could get out and make that exact same money or more in 5 days a week with guaranteed salary and bonuses and all this other kind of stuff. And at first there's a number of years. I mean, if I'm being honest, there was probably 2 or 3 years at the very beginning where I was just like, man, I started to get frustrated. Like I could go do this someplace else for the same amount of time. But I stuck to it. I believed in it, partly because the owner of the practice was my dad, and I trusted him and I believed him, and I knew that things down the road would pay off. And here I am, right? And so what I'm saying, and here I am, is not that I've arrived or I'm some, like, big guy. I'm just saying that where I'm at now from a financial standpoint, both in existing income and potential future income and value of the practice that I own, is exponentially larger than what I would get if I was still employed or still chugging along. And so it's hard to see that. It was just hard to see that at the very beginning. It's like I'm just trying, but I was able to do it because my wife and I were really frugal. We came out of school, we bought a really a really affordable house.
Mm.
We had, we didn't buy new cars. We had the same cars we had in school. Um, yeah, I mean, so I think that was a big part of it. And so I wonder if people think that story is just a sort of pipe dream now, or they really are believing it. What's your sense on that?
Yeah,
Mm,
I think it's getting pushed more and more towards the pipe dream. I mean, I just think recently I had a new grad that, I do a lot through private messaging and emailing, kind of just help out new grads and those that are wanting to get into practice ownership. And he was looking at two different scenarios. One was he wanted to open up cold in his hometown back in Arkansas. And second option was to take a corporate job that would, give him about close to 200K a year off the bat. And so, I told him, I was like, well, what do you really want to pursue? Of course, he wanted to open cold in his hometown. I mean, that was his dream. But the reality of that was that it was going to be a good 3 to 5 years of struggle before it was going to pay off, just how the numbers were working out. But yeah, and it's on top of that, you got the student loans and everything. But we're seeing more and more new grads going that route, though, just taking
yeah,
the corporate route or the private equity, whatever it is, just taking the money because of that debt, because that kind of pulls you back from your dreams. And then the problem is if you wait, what ends up happening is you get more comfortable. You start a family, you buy a house, all of a sudden you have all these other expenses. So that practice that you wanted to build from scratch, obviously that's not going to be working because you got to, have a few years where you're not going to be making money. So, and you need that cash flow. So yeah, I can see how it is starting to
yeah, it is really
stifle
hard, and
some
I think
dream,
that
quote
you
unquote.
you made the point. It's not as good for the profession when you go and do that. And my sense has always been, and I'm this is a broad brush, and it's not accurate across the board, but my sense is most of those places,
Mhm.
you're gonna hustle. They're gonna get their money out of you. You're gonna be working. You might be doing a lot of kind of comprehensive routine care. And
Yes.
as I was on one of your educational seminars, one of the things that I see so often is that you get into that mode of practice for 3, 5 years, and you just get used to seeing a routine patient, routine patient, routine patient. And then when you decide you finally can break away, for those that can break away and move on and open their own
Oh
practice, they
yeah.
just,
Mhm.
how did they learn to practice? What are they comfortable with? Well, they're comfortable with this. And now they're going to just open whatever the corporate practice or the, commercial practice was that they were existing in. They're just going to replicate it, and now it's private, but it's
Right.
the same
Mhm.
thing. And now you're trying to compete against basically the methods that you were using in a corporate practice. And how do you differentiate yourself in the private practice? So yeah, and so then
Yeah,
they don't know how
that's
to
very
get
true.
paid for the
Mhm.
services. First of all, they forget on how to manage. Not forget, but they're not in the mode of managing complex eye diseases, so it takes them longer, and really they're not in the mode of understanding how to get paid for them. So then they see less value in it, and so they'd say, "I'll let somebody else do that." And so I think all of this finance and understanding, managing eye diseases and getting paid to manage those eye diseases, it all really comes in together um, because if you don't make that step at the very beginning, then it's really hard. I would imagine. I speak for myself. I think it would be really hard if I wasn't managing eye diseases, complex eye diseases, for the 3 or 4 years after I was out of school. Um, it would be hard to pick back up.
Hmm. No, yeah, I completely agree with you. I remember when I first got out of school, I worked at a LASIK center for a couple of months, and it's like, after doing LASIK pre and post ops for that's all you're doing. I remember getting back into when I bought my private practice. I was like, yeah, this is tough to get back into because it's just not what you're used to. You get used to that grind, that certain way of practicing, and you get good at it. But it's like you're saying, you need to differentiate if you're going to get into private practice. You can't just practice the conveyor route,
Do you
conveyor belt
think
route. You got to
that
do something a little
schools
bit different.
are
So,
what kind of, I mean, I don't recall much financial, it was mostly like my financial counseling was, hey, we got a financial package for you and here's your loan. And I love my school, by the way. But what are they doing now? Is it different at private
yeah.
schools? I mean, mine was a fraction of what they're spending now. So what kind of financial guidance do they have in school?
Hmm. From what I've heard, I graduated in 2015, so it's been a few years since I've been out. But from what I've heard, it's pretty similar to when I was in school. I remember first day of school, first year, they gave us the whole cheeseburger talk, where a cheeseburger you purchase today is going to be worth three times as much in
Or
the
zero
future
if the right
because you're
person gets in
using student
office.
loans. And that was as far as they basically got.
Yeah.
That's as
We don't know. It could be three times or it could be
exactly, or
never.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
It'll
yeah, that
tax you
was
on the back
pretty
end.
much all we got. And then, yep. And then they're like, yeah.
Yeah.
And then they're just like, okay, time to take out your student loans. Yeah, good luck. So that was pretty much it. And then, we had a good practice management class, but yeah, that was pretty much it. And really, our goal is I mean, we're starting to reach out to schools a lot more now. We've extended our book out to quite a few schools, have it in the bookstore now. And we're just trying to do lectures, just trying to get the word out. And it doesn't need to be us per se. I just really hope that there is education that starts to build in each of these schools on finance. And I hope that it's coming from optometrists or optometry and not bringing in these financial advisors that just want to acquire clients, because I know that does happen in schools, but that's a little bit different. Really, just that solid foundational knowledge of how finance works. I just
Yeah,
think
and
it's
I mean
vital
that's
for
when you can really
any
affect the most
optometrist getting
change,
out
right?
there.
Like, and schools have so many things that they need to teach, and they have to teach, to make practitioners safe and provide excellent care. And I think they do a wonderful job of that. I think they do the best job that can be done for primary eye care. And what I mean, say primary eye care, I mean, prescribing medications and managing lots of eye diseases. I mean that. I think that they do better than anybody, any other training program. But you know, I do think there's got
Mm,
to be something else because it doesn't. You know, if I can get this much money to live, and it's all something I can push down the road, unless I'm really diligent, it's hard. And so those financial institutions are basically just awarding. My sense is they're telling you, they're giving you the speech, but they're saying, yeah, and it's $50,000 a year, or $60,000 a year, $80,000 a year. But it's fine. Just don't have the cheeseburger. It's like, come on, it's not the cheeseburger that's blowing our budget here. It's just not. It's the
yeah,
institution. And so I don't know
right.
a way around
Mm,
that. What do you think about? I mean, what are
yeah.
mechanisms that will drive the cost of education down, or allow us to figure out ways to make it more affordable so it doesn't stymie a profession?
Yeah, that's a good question that we've kicked around quite a bit, and I wish I had a better answer, but yeah, it's a tough one, and I think if someone does come up with the answer, they're going to be very successful as a policymaker. But yeah, I mean, we give some advice to students when they're in school to kind of keep expenses down. Obviously, the tuition, not much we can do about that, but just limiting equipment costs and equipment purchases, just limiting everything you do in school, trying to work if you can, but obviously don't let that affect your schooling and your learning. That, yeah, all these things that you can reduce your debt while in school. It's actually kind of an overlooked concept, but it's important because that's how you're building that debt in the first place, is by spending it those 4 years that you're in optometry school. So the more creative ways you can find to reduce that debt, you're going to be better off in the long run. So, but other than that, yeah, it's tough. It's tough, and I've heard that, yeah, OD education's only going up. I was surprised to see how high it is from when I went to school, because I still don't I still like to think of myself as young, being 7 years out, and it's astronomically different than when I
Yeah.
was there, which
Well,
was
I think we've seen the
not too long ago.
skyrocketing of
So
it. I mean, my sense, just listening to you talk, is that every single student right now in school, anybody that's listening to this, has to at least connect with you and have a plan for what that debt's going to look like and how much that debt is going to be. And I don't think they can trust their financial advisors at school. I will say that blatantly. I don't think it's because they have ill intent. It's because most of those financial advisors in most schools are not. They're not looking out for the profession. They're not looking out for the long term, interests of the patient. They're looking out for, we want you to feel comfortable with this amount of money that this school costs, and because of that, then we're going to figure out a way for you to pay for that now. But and we're going to try to have you do some other smart things. But look, they're and I don't blame the schools, but they're not going to say, look, this is a really expensive decision, and you're going to make $100,000 a year with $500,000 in debt. That's not a smart financial decision. They're just not going to say that. So I think I think students really need to reach out to groups like yourself specifically for other guidance to say, not that, is this a good investment? I think it is. I mean, if you make the right moves, it's a great investment. But you have to be, I think the people who are making right moves are making most of those right moves throughout school. Because you're just going to get out if you haven't been thinking about this, and it's just going to be, you'll be swimming and you'll be frustrated. I've had friends that are like not happy with the choice they've made. They've seriously rethought. I mean, some of them have changed that now, 13 years out. But I have friends that have told me, like, this was a bad decision. I should not have gone to optometry. And it took them a long time. And we just don't want that. We can't have that as a profession. And our patients, they don't benefit from that.
yeah, yeah. No, I know that. Honestly, when I hear those conversations, and I feel like they come up more and more these days, and it's kind of heartbreaking to hear that, especially because most individuals that go into this profession want to, and you have so many different choices. We chose to do this, and to hear that it's the financial burden that's causing people to have regrets about this profession is, it's sad to me, and I think it's
So
something
tell
that we
me,
can prevent
when you think about, we
through
brought
early
up
education.
Dave Ramsey. I don't want to harp on the institutions anymore. I mean, I can't say it enough how valuable they are and how good of a job they do. I just am not. I just think that you need other advice. You need other advice.
Yeah, no, and I
think
agree 100%. Yeah.
So how do you view what you all are doing, or why do I get the sense that Dave Ramsey was really great at the beginning of my career to get myself out of debt, but it doesn't seem to speak as well anymore now that I'm kind of in the middle of my career? Why do I feel like that?
Yeah, I think this is actually a common point that's brought up, and I'm glad you did bring it up, because I think Dave Ramsey is absolutely fantastic for beginners, and I think that's what his market is. That's who he's trying to teach, are people that just have no idea where they're going, and they're just going down that downward slope into more and more debt.
Yeah.
And I think the 7 baby steps, and I think that's in his best-selling book, I think those are great for getting out of debt, for getting you started, getting a foundation. I agree with him on how you have to be intently focused on eliminating debt, and how personal finance, it's mostly just mental. A lot of it's not math. The math is pretty simple when you really look at it. A lot of it's just mental and behavioral. And and I also agree that, debt is probably the number one problem that faces most Americans. I mean, when you look at, I forget what the statistic is.
Something like 70% that
Americans
couldn't
living
afford
paycheck to paycheck.
$1,000
Obviously,
bill or something
debt
like that.
plays
I
a
mean,
big
it's
factor in that.
astronomical. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that like recent statistic that came out, which is crazy. And then, but I think there are, and of course he says to avoid whole life insurance. That's a whole other topic, but I think that's an important one as well. And so I think those are the things he gets right, and I think they're great when you're first starting out. So years 1 through 3 maybe, but then after a while, some of his advice doesn't work well, because then you start to become a high income earner that doesn't have as much debt, and then you have to be a little more strategic with your money, and that's where his advice is mainly just for those early steps. And then
No, let's hear
There's
it.
a few things I
No, it's
don't
good.
like about him. I occasionally watch his show, and I've read some of his books. Yeah, I think number one is he always says, and it's on his website as well. If you use his calculator for investment returns, it auto populates 12%, which is a little bit unrealistic, especially if you're going in an S&P index 500 or a 500 fund. It's going to be about 7% is what the historic average is, and I really think it's a little dangerous to think that whatever you invest is going to get you a 12% return, because that's going to increase expectations to an unrealistic point. Actually, if you really take his advice at heart, I mean, he says
Any day.
optometry school is basically a bad idea
Yeah.
because he doesn't like healthcare professionals taking out a ton of debt to go into school. So when you look at that, that's another thing he says. And then, yeah, and then there's a few other things. He does mention some actively managed funds. I think part of the reason he proposes those is because I'm sure that somehow affects him positively in his business. So I prefer just the passive low cost index funds that those always have a solid return and they beat most active managers out there. So I don't see a reason to go to the active managed funds. And then I think what was the last one? I think he said that, yeah, $1,000 emergency fund is what he recommended. And we might be a little biased because we're on the West Coast here where everything's a little more expensive, but yeah, I think that is another one that should be a little bit higher, especially for ODs, especially if you have a family and you've got a mortgage. And then especially if you own a practice as well, you got to have a larger emergency fund in those cases. So,
Well, yeah, I mean,
so yeah, when it comes to investing, I think there's different ways to go.
we definitely felt like, we had the emergency fund. We were on the higher end of what, both for the practice and personally. And when COVID hit, it was like, this isn't enough.
Oh,
I mean, it was enough to get us through that period, but you start thinking about things totally differently. You start thinking like, okay, well, if we do this, okay, we could last this long. We could last this long. Okay, we could cut to here. I mean, it was amazing where you just almost like, it took me, I would say it probably took me a solid 18 months to really kind of feel like, okay, this is still an acceptable amount of emergency fund. And that really threw me into disarray. Yeah, I think my thing with
COVID, all the doomsday scenarios,
yeah. Well, at some point,
toilet paper being astronomically expensive.
Yeah. But at some point, you do sort of throw your hands up. You're kind of like, all right, well, there's risk in the market. There's risk here and there. And if everything falls apart, well, nothing's worth anything. And so you better have just a bunch of alcohol you can barter with. You know what I mean? And wise food storage or whatever else you got in your basement. I mean, so at some point you have to have faith in the system and the structures that are in place. And you could play it out for a long period of time and no amount of cash that you're sitting on is enough. But it took me a long time to come back after that, because I remember the shock of just like, sort of like, okay, we prepared, we were ready, but it doesn't feel like enough,
Yeah. I remember those, especially, I don't know if where you were closed down completely, but in California, we were closed down for 2 months. And I remember just sitting in my office every day, not a single patient coming in, just, kind of looking around. And like, I kept all my employees on because I didn't want them to fall in hard times. And I was like, I really hope we open up soon because I don't know how much longer we can do this for.
I know.
So I feel you there.
I know, we were cycling. So we didn't have to not see patients. We were able to, we could, basically our patients were just canceling, they were doing it themselves. We were seeing urgencies and emergencies. We interpreted those as patient wants to come in, we'll see you. And that's how we interpreted it. So, but the reality is that we probably saw 4 or 5 patients a day. Most of them were for ocular disease, urgencies and emergencies. And we kind of cycled through. I mean, think about it. We didn't know. We were being told that this was spread on surfaces, and so we were cycling teams through. Yeah. So like one team that was with my dad on the days he was there, then I was with a different team, and so every other day we kind of alternated, and just so if somebody went down, if one group went down and we had to quarantine, there was still somebody that could take care of patients. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think about. Yeah, I would say if we think about Dave Ramsey, my initial thing is at some point you start looking at, like you said, high earners, and you look at, I can invest in my business, or I can buy more of the practice, or I can, buy a widget in the practice. And then you start to say, well, if I were just going to take that money and pay off a loan that, my student loans were 3.275%. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you think that's not even good math, but that's where it starts to feel weird when you are a business owner and Dave Ramsey kind of falls apart, which is why when I read through your stuff, I was like, yeah, this makes a lot more sense for a higher income earner.
Yeah. You kind of have to balance it out a little bit and know where the priorities lie and know where the higher trajectories are going to be. So,
yeah. So, Aaron, tell everybody where they can find you. If they haven't already found you, where can they find you? Where can they go to learn more information about ODs on Finance and all those good things?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, website, odsonfinance.com. We are all on there. There's a live chat feature if you have a question. It actually shoots right over to my phone and Dad's phone. So feel free to check out all the resources on there. And then we just launched a new tool, OD Clinicals, that came out 3 days ago. It's just a kind of an encyclopedia and everything a clinician needs at their chair site. So feel free to check that out too. And that's linked to the website. And otherwise, yeah, feel free to email me at aneufeld@gmail.com. Happy to answer any questions. But yeah, and then of course the ODs on Finance Facebook page where it all started. I'm active on there. So is Dad, Julie, Chris, the rest of the ODs on Finance team. And we're happy to answer any question, whether it be on the forum in front of 13,000 individuals or privately. So feel free to message us.
Awesome. Dr. Neufeld, appreciate it. Thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on, and it was a pleasure having you on to that Billing and Coding lecture. I actually learned so much from that lecture. I was telling Dad and Joy that we need to have you on again because that was fantastic.
Oh, I'd love to.
We had so many positive comments. Yeah, we looked at our feedback. Normally, you have like 2% that didn't like it. This one was 100%. Everyone's like,
awesome. Yeah.
We all learned quite a few things. So yeah.
Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it.